while we wait, if anyone wants to share maybe their, favorite deskless job that they've had in the past in the comments, in the chat box. I think with this topic, it can be a little bit abstract. But a lot of us have had some deskless job in the past, I'm sure. What about you, Tony?
I was just thinking, Heather, I was sure you were going to ask me that question. My deskless job, my most recent deskless job was actually, I was a teenager working in a kitchen of a pub in the UK, making roast dinners for customers. So a very small company. I think there was 4 of us that maybe worked in the bar. So our communication needs were a little bit easier. But yeah, that was the last deskless job I had, was working in a pub. I've just seen ice cream scooper, which is easier read than said, but that's a pretty cool job. Like literally, that's a cool job. I want to be an ice cream scooper.
Job to have as like a teen or a young adult too. All right, well, I think we have a good amount of people to get going. So welcome everyone to today's session. Really excited to have you. Today we're going to talk about prioritizing the possible creative ways to engage your deskless and disconnected workforce, so that 80% of the workforce that we know is, part of that quote unquote deskless population, they can be really hard to reach simply for communicators. So today we're going to talk about, what are some new ways, new tactics you can try, new ideas to explore, really provide some inspiration to help you reach those hard to reach workers. And we want to keep this interactive as well. So, pop your questions in the Q&A, put your ideas in the chat, share your challenges with us, share what's working well for you. You're on with a great group of communications professionals, really use this time to get what you need out of this session. We want to make it interactive. So my name's Heather Bicknell. I am the product marketing director at Populo, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Tony Stewart of Scarlett Abbott. Tony, would you introduce yourself for our audience?
Of course, certainly. Thanks, Heather. So yeah, my name is Tony Stewart. I'm the head of digital at Scarlett Abbott, which basically makes me the resident geek of the consultancy. We're a small consultancy based in the UK with our work is in the employee experience, business culture, employee value proposition. What is it that makes people feel connected, that make them feel welcome at work, that give them purpose, so that they feel like they're doing a great job and are part of a community that supports them at work. As you could imagine, head of digital, my specialism often is in the channels and the digital spaces and places that we create in order to cultivate those communities, in order for people to not only be able to express themselves in the physical world, but as we're all very aware of now, the virtual world, and making sure that people have a sense of connection, are able to collaborate with each other and do a great job and feel rewarded for a great job as well. So yeah, I'm delighted to be invited to talk to Heather today about those workers that are a bit more difficult to get contact with, to communicate with, to help them understand strategy, to help support positive business behaviors and business change when traditionally they are far away geographically, or they're not at a desk and they have those devices that we're usually accustomed to. So yeah, thanks, Heather.
Excellent. Well, yeah, I know we wanted to get kicked off with a poll question. Actually, we're curious to know what digital tools you all are currently using and relying on to reach your disconnected and frontline workforce. So, you can select any of the channels that we have here. If you feel like we don't capture what you do today, please feel free to drop that in the chat box as well. We'll just give that a minute or two.
I'm interested to see what people say about this one, because it can vary really wildly from client to client, from business to business, or even team to team, right? Sometimes we find teams themselves have created their own platforms or their own ways of connecting with each other if they're finding it difficult to do so.
Yeah, absolutely.
I hear sigh, just email and Slack. I mean, that could be a powerful combination. That's another thing as well. What we want to explore in this session today is, even if we have perceptually weak incumbent platforms, what can we do actually creatively to make them work for us, to make us work, make them work smarter for us and our needs in the organization too.
Mm-hmm. All right, so looks like we have our results here. Email is coming out on top as the most popular channel, which is interesting because I know often we find that this population might not have even a corporate email address, so that can sometimes be a challenge. Intranet, number 2, and then digital signage coming in at number 3. Tony, is this sort of representative of what you tend to see? Are any of these results surprising?
Not particularly surprising. It's interesting, actually, with the email one. Does that mean that maths, 22% of people just simply aren't using email to connect with their employees? Because that's almost a staple, right? But then we're talking about deskless workers, how are we using those alternative tools? SMS, 5% is a really interesting one, because that's often seen as a crisis comms platform, but actually can be super effective in engaging with an audience that aren't necessarily easy to reach. And it's better than nothing, let's be honest, So yeah, no, it's really good. I'm happy to see digital signage as almost high as 50%, only because I recently did some video blogs around my love for digital signage and how I think it can do some really exciting things to engage employees, even though we're moving to a hybrid world of work where less of our people are in the office, but I still think it's a really worthwhile investment because there's lots of really cool and interesting things you can do with that platform. So I'm happy to see that that's quite high on the list as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we wanted to get started just talking about, and this gives us a good lay of the land as well for this audience, but just generally, what is the average organization who has a deskless population today doing to reach that workforce? What are you seeing, Tony, with the clients you work with?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, because what we're seeing is like a two-pronged approach. There's, first of all, before you even talk about the technology in the platform, it's the behavioral stuff. So how are those people working on a day-to-day basis? What are their rhythms? What are their patterns? How do they prefer to be communicated to? What kind of content and comms resonates with that particular audience? What kind of tone of voice? Are there health and safety regulations, which means they can only check message at a certain time? Understanding the behaviors and that audience really well is the first really big thing you can do in order to reach those deskless workers. So regardless of the platform, it's always worth doing some research to understand that audience's need, what resonates with them, their communication styles, if they prefer short form text, video, infographics, TikTok style stories. Understanding that audience is first and foremost really important. And once you've got that down pat, then what we look at is the technical side of things. How can we create digital spaces, digital communities, or ways of connecting with that audience that work well in their patterns, which we'd already identified in the audience mapping? So do they have mobile phones? Do we have a bring your own device policy? Is there a canteen or place that they can stop at and use an iPad in between their shifts, for example? So first understand the audience, and then exploring what technology and platforms can be best suited for that audience based on their preferences. So in a broad sense, these are the two big things that we would always advise clients to look at first and foremost before they can create that kind of cadence of regular communications and activity.
And what challenges are you seeing people coming with? Why is this? I think we all, not communicating to 80% of the workforce seems like an obvious problem in and of itself. But what, is it attrition drivers, engagement? Like, what are you seeing as the top challenges that communicators are trying to address here?
Yeah. So first of all, to make this personal to the communicators, it's resource. So if you want to understand your audience and do that audience mapping, what you'll probably come out as a result is, okay, this group of people like video content, and this group of people aren't interested in that subject, but they're only interested in this global. And just in itself, that makes the internal comms job more difficult, right? So we create a level of complexity and therefore a requirement of resource in order to overcome those things. So resource is an issue. The second thing then is really knowing what technology to implement. What is the technology that I've got limited budget? What are the platforms? What are the channels that are going to resonate the most with that audience? And sometimes picking that channel or making a case for budget for that channel can be a real challenge to those communicators as well. We'll always say at Scarlett Abbott that connecting your business purpose, your goals, your strategy, what's happening in your business to that channel is a really great way of winning over the people with the purse strings and getting you that budget. But that is a real challenge in itself. When you start to talk about the communications themselves, then you're looking at what message is going to resonate with the right people. How can I make sure that this piece of comms is relevant to this audience and make sure that it doesn't create noise or confusion for this audience over there? So if I've got people in a factory making the jeans, and I've also got people in a shop selling the jeans, they are both part of the same company. The outcome is to sell jeans to people, but these guys are manufacturing and these guys are retailing, and they're going to have very different communications need, very different communications requirements. So I think that example brings to life how important that audience mapping is. And then it's understanding the guys in the factory don't have Wi-Fi access because of health and safety. They don't have a bring your own device policy. So what do we have to overcome to create channels that are meaningful to them? And then the people in retail, what do we need to do? Is there a display? Is there a digital sign in the staff canteen at the store where they're selling the jeans so that we can reach them with? Is there free Wi-Fi that we can provide for their personal mobile phones so that they can access the comms that we want to access? So those are very typically the kind of challenges that we're seeing from clients when we talk about this dispersed workforce.
I see some comments in the chat as well, talking about different generational preferences, which is again, other lens that is really important to, understand about your audience and think through both channels and content. So it can be really hard to do all that targeting. Yeah,
digital capability, it's an interesting one, because I will hold my hands up to say that I was once guilty of assuming everyone just knew how to use Twitter or everyone knows how to use Facebook, because I didn't grow up with them. I'm clearly too old for that, but I'm very familiar with them, right? And so we can sometimes make very sweeping assumptions about the digital capability of our people, and actually once you start going down and doing the research and audience mapping, you'll start to realize that maybe some people are intimidated by an internal enterprise social network like Slack or like Viva Engage or Yammer or something like that, because they're kind of just not used to putting themselves out there, and certainly in a work context where they might not want to look silly or ridiculous or ask stupid questions, right? So all these factors will play into making sure that we create digital spaces that feel safe, secure, and welcome for people to talk how they want to talk and share content with each other as well. And that's when we start to talk about two-way conversations. Obviously, a lot of this work in trying to reach a dispersed workforce is about getting comms to them. But I would argue that it's 2023. And if we're talking about internal communications in a modern world, we need to talk about sharing communication, but also expecting feedback, discussion, and conversation about the things that we're communicating with as well. I think that's the standard that we should all be aspiring to.
I absolutely agree. We have a question here, and I think it'd be a good time for us to dig into this one. So someone's asking, how do you reach employees who don't have access to those typical systems you might be using for maybe the desk employees, like email or a company-wide intranet? They're saying they have a manufacturing hourly workforce that doesn't have access to those things.
It is tricky, but thankfully, in 2023, there's lots of opportunities there. So one is that bring your own device model. So we've done some research at Scarlett Abbott that suggests that if people are able to access content at work that is relevant to them, that is useful to them, that helps connect them to other employees in both a collaborative but also in a social way, they are willing to use their personal devices to access a Wi-Fi network or even their own cellular data to be a part of those communities. They're willing to bridge that gap in order to be a good corporate citizen and to be engaged in that way. That's not, obviously bring your own device isn't perfect for every industry or every organization. Sometimes there's tech in the way, sometimes there's just simply too many rules and regulations around the organization, but we do find that as a real helpful a way to overcome it. Digital signage, again, this is like the digital signage party right now, but having a digital or several digital signs in your manufacturing space where people maybe walk into the office, where they sit down and have their coffees, where they can safely glance at that information at times during their day to understand. And we see it often where there might be targets that are met on the manufacturing floor or kind of like work drives, but then also QR codes or information that says, hey, we're rolling out this new volunteering scheme, or hey, there's a fantastic cooking club that we've launched digitally. And if you're a bit of a cook and you want to interact socially with your colleagues on recipes, scan the QR code and you can access our Viva Engage or Popular mobile platform and be a part of that community and be a part of that engagement as well. So digital signage, certainly in more kind of manufacture heavy or where there's not a lot of downtime, can be really helpful. Again, if you're going to scan that QR code, you need to make sure that the QR code is available to that person on a bring your own device. There's some like technical stuff that you might need to iron out there, but there's all sorts of things that you can do to engage that workforce.
Yeah, I would say too, we often find that particularly in manufacturing environments where safety is such a huge component of the workday, you know, a lot of employees just aren't, you know, if phones are not allowed on the manufacturing floor, you know, and a lot of the digital signage we see as well is actually using that in the break rooms, in those casual spaces, not sort of, not, you know, you don't want to have comms distract, but you want to, of course, give those workers an opportunity to connect with the wider organization and to learn what else is going on and why their work makes an impact.
Yeah, there'll be touch points. For example, if there's a kind of a factory floor and there's a locker room where you have to go in and you have to like put your stuff away and lock it up for the day. These are like touch points. These are real opportunity places to make sure there's even old school posters, if you haven't got digital signage, QR codes, ways to link them to other things in those safe spaces. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we've touched on some of the challenges and, you know, the current state. I know we also wanted to introduce some ideas from what we're seeing as companies who are innovating in this area, right? And, you know, Tony, you've worked with some, you know, we have a lot of great companies doing good work in this space at Populo. So let's just touch on a few of those examples of what's going well and what's working for others. And as we do this, really encourage anyone who is, you know, doing anything that's working really well for them to reach populations like this today, pop that in the chat as well, so we can learn from each other. But Tony, just to kick it over to you, I know you had a, you know, successful use case around improving attrition through reaching a deskless workforce. Could you talk to us about that?
Of course. So with this example, we were working with one of the big 4 consultancy firms, and they had a challenge, if you will, on attrition. People were leaving their business, and when we broke it down, we looked at the ABCD of retention, which is around autonomy, belonging, capability, and development. And so here we have some very clear goals, objectives, and values on what will support retention in that organization. And if you pick something like belonging, for example, as just one of those strategic objectives, then look at your suite of tools, look at your audience and break that down. What does belonging look like, mean? How does that manifest in my company? What does it look like to belong to this company? What does it look like to belong to your team and your colleagues and the management board? And once you start to kind of break that down, then we start to say to ourselves, okay, so we understand what belonging means. That might mean praise for a job well done. That might be support for collaborative efforts. That might be sharing skills like photography or language skills in order to get a project complete. However that looks like, what can our digital platforms do then to create a base to encourage more of that behavior? So if we talk about praise, what do our digital channels have to do to support praise and a job well done in our organization? And so by having a very clear outcome and ambition, if you like, letting that flow through to what our digital tools are going to do or what we want them to do makes it very easy to create those kind of behavioral changes. So making sure there are places for people to praise, that there are online communities on Popular feeds, for example, If somebody's achieving some really good stuff on a regular basis, maybe we highlight them on a digital screen and say, this is Steve. Steve's done some great work in sales this month. To read more about Steve's journey and how he did that, scan the QR code and you can read more about it on our intranet, for example. So signposting those examples of belonging on our digital platforms will then encourage a culture of belonging, which means that people will feel more connected to the organization and they won't feel like leaving as much as they did maybe before they were a part of all those communities and stories. And the story is a very passive one. I read about Steve, but actually, where are those communities where we can share language skills or photography skills or swap shifts? You know, we're talking about manufacturing, we're talking about retail here. Where are those communities where we can feel connected, swap shifts, talk about childcare, talk about well-being, be able to step in for each other, feel a sense of belonging because we're doing a job well done and we're supporting our colleagues in that way? Are we creating digital spaces to allow people to do that? Because we should be. And I think that's really important when it comes to trying to overcome things like attrition, when it comes to what we're able to do in communications.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of what you touched on really gets back to the idea of the importance of localizing communication. So, you know, it's not just about seeing recognitions for, you know, employees in the corporate office or in a site you don't work with, you know, like seeing each other is super important. Getting those job postings that are relevant to your site or, you know, would be the next step up in your career. Having those stories that are localized and also empowering communicators, you know, working with, you know, plant managers or, you know, we're focusing a lot on manufacturing here, but, you know, other local leaders to help contribute to the content is so important for it to resonate, I think.
Yeah, I think that feeds in even more to belonging. If I'm contributing to the news stories, if I'm, you know, I'm going to pick another industry now because you're right, we're always thinking about manufacturing. Let's say airline pilots, you know, they're or air support staff. They're in the air a lot, so they're offline, and then they land, they open up their mobile phone, and suddenly they get some praise from a colleague for a job well done, and they're then able to comment, like, feed that back into the feed as well. They're immediately going to feel a sense of belonging and connection to the organization, but through that very small interaction. And I think, again, giving people the platform to speak up the chain, so we're not just broadcasting to them, but actually hearing their voices and incorporating that in our communications, I think is super important, and we should definitely be doing that.
Okay. Absolutely. There's a lot of great engagement happening here. Okay, here's a good question. How do you break the traditional comms outlets of just sending thousands of emails for everything and get buy-in for use of other tools such as SharePoint or Yammer? I think buy-in is such a critical piece of this discussion as well.
Buying is directly proportional to the how much is it for me. I'm going to buy into it if I think it's going to be good for me, if I'm going to find value in this community, in this group, in this Slack channel, in this popular app that you've just asked me to download, right? So our job as communicators, I think, is to first and foremost, and we don't always do this as communicators, is understand why our platform is so good. What is it really there for? I've rolled out these digital signs. I've rolled out Popular feeds. I've decided to install Slack, whatever it is, for what reason, for what outcome, and have very clear goals and ambitions that are directly linked to our business goals and our internal communications goals and ambitions. You need to convince yourself that this platform is absolutely brilliant and rock and roll and everyone needs to be a part of it. So that's where it starts. Once you're convinced, you then have to communicate that to the rest of your organization in a very clear, accessible way so that other people can see the benefits and the value for themselves. And sometimes that will mean kind of put into one side your goals and ambitions for the platform and understanding, well, what's in it for Steve working in sales? Or what's in it for Mary, who's on the shop floor making the jeans? Or what's in it for Richard, who just landed on his plane? It's been a 12-hour flight. Why the hell would he open Popular feeds to check the news in there? What's in it for them? And if you can answer that question, like, and really stand by it, then you bet you'll be able to convince your employee audience to download that platform and do the same for themselves. It's just, you have to do the job. You have to work out what it is that platform's really doing to benefit your audience. Is it about informing strategic decisions? Is it about your employee value proposition and the perks and the benefits that they can get from working there? Is it a sense of connection from social activities? And we see this that's demonstrated very powerfully along a lot of our clients. Is it about being part of employee resource groups? So the Women's Network, the LGBTQIA+ network, whatever those networks look like. If people feel like they're adding value to their lives and they're adding value to their workplace experience, then they will go there. So you have to be really clear as to what those platforms are going to do for the business, and then communicate that in a very clear way to your employees. And you'll be surprised how much they will then adopt it, because it's honest and it's genuine. It's not just the fancy new sexy tech. It's actually for a purpose, and isn't a real obvious outcome of it.
No, I completely agree. I think another thing we see here as well, and sort of a best practice example of this, if you were just on the session with Ryan Taylor from Delta before this one, talking about ways that they're using digital signage, how they started with an employee comms use case, bringing those targeted comms to flight attendants, ramp agents, and office workers. But then also using screens for productivity or operational purposes. I think using a blend of operational comms and organizational comms can sort of, it gives that immediate sort of, helpfulness and attention, it becomes part of the actual workflow, which sort of makes, for the organization who's maybe making a purchasing decision, or even employees to engage with it, being able to rotate those different types of communications can sort of make everyone, more aware of all of those things at once. I think there's a really powerful case to be made for bringing both of those things to the table when it comes to reaching your deskless populations.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what's also important, and might be like controversial, unpopular opinion, is that at the end of the day, your people, the people that work for your company, are digitally communicating and engaging with their friends and family every single day. They have WhatsApp, and they have Instagram, and they have TikTok, and whatever new, sexy, stylish social media platform is out there. And if your business, it's 2023, and if your business isn't stepping up and saying, hey, we can not maybe meet them, but if we can set a standard of comms and being able to connect with your employees, between each other, corporately, down the line, from leadership, like in all different directions, just like you expect at home, then like, are we holding up our side of the bargain of being a good employee, or being a responsible employee that where you feel connected, where you feel informed? And I had to reflect on this last night. So I'm a Twitch streamer. I play computer games, and people tune into my channel and they watch me, and it's all silly and ridiculous and fun. And I've been able over the last 2 years to cultivate a really engaged, beautiful community around the games that I play, with a laptop, an iPhone, and a PlayStation. And if your multi-million-pound business isn't able to create communities of practice and purpose and culture and belonging and connection, like, what is it doing? Like, if it's actually, you have to make the jump. You have to really look at your audience, understand what it is that they need, what are they asking for, what will help them in their day-to-day to feel better connected to each other, to feel praised, to feel seen, to feel like they're adding value. Understand your audience, look at the platforms out there. Obviously, Populo have a ton of fantastic platforms, which I stand behind and have helped many of our clients roll out as well. How can they connect your audience to do those amazing things? Because they are out there, they are available, and your employees will expect a certain amount of communication and a certain amount of connection and belonging as part of your business. So I think it's up to us to really step up and serve them in that way.
I think that's a wonderful answer. I know we're somehow already out of time here. Our time has flown by, and we'll definitely endeavor with so many great, questions in the chat, in the Q&A box. Maybe we can just close out on one last question, and then we'll make sure to follow up with everyone whose questions we weren't able to get to today. But I've seen a couple of questions along this theme, but tips for getting through to deskless workers who are sort of resistant to a self-service approach, hourly associates who, really want to take their break without being distracted by, feeling like they need to read comms at the same time. They want to be able to take their break, which is of course understandable, and don't want to use it for work purposes. How would you say, like, what's the best way to, address that challenge?
That is a tricky one. Part of me is along the same line of thought of there will always be an audience of bad eggs in your organization that just simply don't want to know. They don't want to connect. And you can spend an awful lot of effort trying to connect to that 5%, but then you neglect the other 95%. So if you're an internal comms team that is limited resource, be careful who you try to chase and engage, because there will always be people that go, I'm not interested, I don't care. And that's fine, that's on them. So just be careful, pick your battles is what I'd say. However, again, if you can communicate the relevance, the opportunity, the community, the sense of belonging to those people that are maybe on the fence in real terms that are relevant to them, not just, hey, download popular feeds because it will allow you to connect, communicate, and collaborate, and other very ambiguous words that don't really resonate with anyone in the real world. Let's talk about actual relevancy to them. They want to connect to other people from social because they're humans, and humans love to be social. They want to praise each other because humans love to be praised, and they love to share praise and a job well done. Look at those opportunities where they can really connect in meaningful ways, and then tell them about that. Tell them that they can do that on that platform, and you'll definitely overcome some of those real naysayers. What I have found as well, as I know I'm going over time, is look for those naysayers that are higher up the chain. So if you've got a leadership board of 10 people and there's that one leader that just isn't convinced, spend a little time on that leader, because that leader will have influence and will have power. And I've managed to turn those around before, and they become the biggest supporters of the platform, and that could have a huge impact on the people that they run and other people in the organization as well. And often their resistance comes from a place of fear or lack of understanding or lack of digital capability, and they don't want to be seen silly or out of touch in front of their business. So there's a little bit of stakeholder management that goes there. Tap into their fear, understand, help them, handhold them, be kind, get them on the platform. And again, you'll be surprised the impact that can have as well.
And that's some great advice, Tony. Well, Tony, been a pleasure talking to you about this topic. And thank you everyone for joining us for today's session. We hope you found it informative.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thanks, Heather, for inviting me.